This rock may look like some average rock, but it is not. It holds one of the most ancient writings in Sudan. In the lower part of Sudan in the 18th dynasty, a pharaoh who was marking his territories all over the Nile River decided to make his final border here. In this area, he wrote one of his declarations saying that if any of the Nubian chiefs were to act out against him, they would be killed instantly. This rock is located pretty far away from the border of Egypt today, and it tells us that the Egyptians were not that scared of leaving their own borders. It also tells us that somebody somewhere that deep in Sudan could read. Now, although this is the lowest inscriptions that we can find today, it is not the lowest evidence of Egypt, but that is for another video. What I want to show you is those empires that existed along the Nile. And the reason I want to show you this is because when Thutmose took it over, he was taking over already established areas. And then when they carried on what Egyptians were doing and even keeping their religion far beyond the day, it will tell us the real reason why the people of Dongola and Mokoria and those areas that would eventually have some of their local population end up within the Kanem Empire. If we look at this image from Google Earth, we can see there is a place called Kanisa Kyrgyz. This is not the ancient Egyptian word, and this word really has nothing to do with ancient Egypt. This is a particular location. This rock is in this location, but you can't get any further, and even if you did, you could not see it using Google Earth. Hajar al Marwa is its name. Now, Hajar al Marwa is a huge quartz-sized outcrop some 400 kilometers north of Khartoum, just above the Great Nile, and it is situated in the desert about 1 kilometer from the riverbank. Despite the fact that it is very visually prominent, the rock must have been a significant landmark in antiquity. It carries incised and painted boundary inscriptions in the name of Thutmose I and Thutmose III, two pharaohs of the 18th dynasty. These inscriptions represent the southernmost testimonies of Pharaoh Egypt and officially mark the southern limit of its control, or probably more precisely, the southernmost point to which Egyptian expedition advanced up the Nile. Now, this is from Discover Sudan, which is a website. That is the basic description of it. Now, this rock itself obviously was very important to the Egyptians because it's not just those people who wrote there. There was also several inscriptions by Egyptian officials from the same period, are additional sources of historical interest, not least since they shed light on the organization of the expedition at the time. Inscriptions of the 19th century Pharaoh Ramses II demonstrate their continued interest of the Egyptians in this area. So remember when I talked about how we find no DNA of Middle Easterners in this region of Sudan up until about the Christian period, even though we know for a fact that Egyptians moved down all the way to this area. Now, there is an important reason why I had to put in Google Earth here, because all of the Nile until you get to here is going to be very important because their empires moved with that area. A lot of money and effort was put in to discovering the furthest reaches of this area through the river. Now, Thutmose knew that they could go around and go to the land of Cush, which would be in Eritrea and southern parts of Eritrea, but that was not their interest. The why that comes with going this far actually starts off with the viceroy and if officially stamping out the Nubians and saying to them that yes, their domain is part of Egypt. Now, of course, one of the things that Nubians would always throw back at the Egyptians is that their territories is way bigger than the areas that the Egyptians hold. This is what sort of motivated these people to travel further. And of course, they wanted to hold the land of gold, the gold that was already there. And then, which I think this is more of a justification, they did it for the gods to sort of establish further the true gods of the area or the Egyptian gods inside of Sudan or Nubia. Some of the best victory stealers of Thutmose, the first and the third, are in the Sudanese area rather than Egypt itself. For example, if we look back in the map, there's a place called Jebel Barkal. Jebel Barkal is located right next to Karima, and we will use that as a reference because I don't want to zoom too much in because we lose reference of the area that we're in. So let me first point out the area that we were talking about before is over here. And you can see that the only way that someone would end up in that area is if they were following the Nile, which is a very good idea. Now you can see if you follow the Nile itself, follow the water, if you go to the bottom with the water, you see this loop that goes all the way up. Right close to the bottom, you see Karima right there. So for reference, that's where Jebel Barkal is. So why does it matter? Well, because Jebel Barkal is the area in which one of the most famous stela of Thutmose II exists. And in this, they mention the Nubians, which they mention them in a word that was used by the ancient Egyptians. Now, this is important because I want to make a video of what everybody else called the Egyptians. I'm going to do this later. But here is what the Egyptians called the Nubians. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. Let's just go here. So just to give context, he mentions places, and I want to make sure I separate how he mentions the others, and then he mentions the Nubian areas. And by the way, I know Nubian is not the right word. I was just using it so that I can change the word when I get to here. So it says, who strikes the southerners and beheads the northerners. So strikes the southerners is striking the Nubian areas. Beheads the northerners means gets rid of the people who are at the top. This is for a reason. Who smashes the heads of the evil minded, who carries out a massacre of the Bedouin tribes of Asia, important, who overthrows the rebels among the Bedouin. By the way, all of these words, which are translated at the top, are very important because they tell you the words that were used before we had our modern words. Again, very important. Then the next one goes straight to Nubia, who subjugates the lands at the ends of the world. This is referring to Nubia, who smites the nomads of Nubia. Now you can see there that the word is Taseti, the land of the bow, obviously. And Taseti is what I'm going to use from now on to mean Nubia, who attains the boundaries of the foreign lands of those who attacked him. So this is the motivation of why he took over Taseti. Of everything else, the real motivation is that the Nubians or Tasseti were the ones who came after him first. Now, there's a lot that goes with that. The first one is during the time of Tutmos the first and the third, there was a huge unifying faction of Tassetian tribes, or the tribes of Tasseti, that attacked the Nubian areas or the areas of Tasseti. They attacked the Egyptian side of that border. And the reason why they were doing this was because Egypt was weak. Now, I've talked about this before, and if you want to see the full thing that covers the entire thing, I will put that in the description. But to cover the rest of it, we have to go up the river. If you move your eyes further down, you will see a place called Al Daba. Now, Al Daba is a very prehistoric site, and this area of Al Daba has all the history of Sudan in one area. Firstly, it has 200 known sites that range from the prehistoric times when the Tasseti people were building Tumalu, although they wouldn't have been called Tasseti at the time because the Egyptians didn't really exist as an entity at the time, through the ages, where we see inscriptions of ancient Egyptians, and then we see this pyramid that exists at El Kuru, which is in between El Daba and Karima. El Kuru holds a pyramid that was built in the 25th dynasty. But obviously, what we are looking for is the trip that he takes. So we can see here that he starts off. Now, obviously, he starts the other way. We're going backwards here. So he ends off at this area that we pointed at. He was at Karama, traveled through all the way to Aldaba. These are stops that they were making. There are tons of other stops that they made, but these are the big important ones. And then he travels even further. Now, the next kingdoms that I'm going to show are the ones that are connected to West Africa. These kingdoms that are connected to West Africa are connected not because of the differences that they had, but because they had so much in common, starting, of course, with religion. Now, if we look higher, we go to Al Golid. This area too was traveled by Thutmose, but it serves more as a bridge between the other parts of the Nile. You can imagine in their trip in the past what they were thinking when they were traveling down the Nile, and the many different tribes they ran into. See, remember when he mentions Tasseti, he does not mention them as one giant kingdom, but instead mentions that they are nomads of this area. How many different peoples, how many different languages, how many different arts did he have to come down and see? But he still landed on one conclusion, and this is by the name Tasseti, the land of the bow. No matter where he went, still the bow was a thing. So now we go up to Dongola. Although Dongola played a huge role in the history of Egypt in Thutmose's time and later years, the area that seems to have played a much bigger role is where Dukigel is. Dukigel is located in Kerma. Now, on either side of these are very important states. So if you go further north, you will find important areas where gold is to be found. If you go east, you will find more civilization, the desert, all this other type of stuff. And if you go west, that's where you'll find places like Mara being people who came from this area and started another population close to the border of Chad. These people are responsible for some of the ruins that are still found on this Sudanese border that is surrounded with Chad. That means we have people who are historically tied to ancient Egypt who come from the areas of Kerma, Dongala, El Gulid, El Daba, and all these other regions and form a new civilization that would then become the Kanem Empire. To some degree, they are probably the most underrated large civilization that existed that is tied to one of the best histories ever. Now, obviously, the thing that probably makes them not hit the history books that much is how tied up to mythology they are. And part of that is their fault by tying themselves up to Islamic leaders. But I don't want to get too caught up in the West African side of it yet. Instead, let us go to Khartoum. Khartoum as well holds great secrets, but Khartoum is lower than all of these civilizations. But it also played a role in Chad, as some of the people of Khartoum moved through this area, barren area, and landed in the same area of Nyala. The unfortunate thing is that some of the ruins have been destroyed by gold miners. So if you see from Khartoum, if you keep going up, you will see that little bump that you see, that's where we were looking at before. We were looking at Dukigel and the rest of the Meroitic civilizations in that area, Kerma, all of that. But if we go all the way down, there was still stuff going on as far back as 2,000 years ago. And we will read this article that will show us why it is so sad. So, as we read here, Sudan's Jebel Maraga illegal gold diggers destroy ancient site. Remains of a 2 millennia old site of Jebel Maraga that was ravaged by gold hunters are scattered on the sand in the desert. Oh, by the way, this is from the BBC in 2020. So, illegal gold diggers have destroyed a 2,000-year-old archaeological site in Sudan in the eastern region of the Sahara Desert, officials say. The Jebel Moraga site, which dates from the Meroitic period between 350 BC and 350 AD, is said to have either been a small settlement or a checkpoint. Officials from Sudan's Antiquities and Museums Department said when they visited the site, some 270 kilometers north of the capital, Khartoum, last month, they found two mechanical diggers and 5 men at work. They had excavated a vast trench about 17 meters, which is 55 feet deep and 20 meters long. Can you imagine how many things they could have destroyed with that level of digging? So they had only one goal in digging here to find gold. They did something crazy to save time. They used a heavy machinery, a shocked archaeological Habab Idris Ahmed, who has worked at the historical location since 1999, told the AFP news agency Sudan is home to hundreds of pyramids and other ancient sites, although they are not as well known as those in northern neighbor Egypt. Sudan's archaeologists warned that the destruction was not unique but part of a growing problem. At Sai, a 12-kilometer long island in the Nile, hundreds of graves some dating back to the times of the pharaohs, have been raided and destroyed by looters. Out of 1,000 more or less well known sites in Sudan, at least 100 have been destroyed or damaged. Saeed Hatem El Noor, Sudan's director of antiquities and museums. He added that the lack of security at the site made them easy targets for looters. This is where the ancient Medjay would have come in handy. So I think you get the point. Firstly, here's something that a lot of people don't know. There are a lot of archaeological sites in Sudan. When I say a lot, I mean a lot that people don't even know about. They don't even know exist. And they're not just limited to the Nile, because these people migrated from the Nile and went to Chad or the borders of Chad and started the Kanem civilization. This Kanem civilization, which you can see in my previous video, expanded all the way to Nigeria, forming the Kanem Bornu civilization. But I wanted to highlight for you that Dongala, an ancient area that was important in the formation of the Kanem, was a post invaded Egyptian area. So Egyptians had been coming to this area for thousands of years. So it has, even though it's Nubian, it has a lot of ancient Egyptian influence. And then that Egyptian influence was taken to Kanem, and then that Kanem influence was taken to Nigeria. That is the long, short story of the Kanem. Thank you.